A very, very warm welcome to you all and a good morning, if anything. I really hope that so far you have been enjoying the African Energy Week 2021 session. Today, we are proceeding with the first session to kickstart a very eventful day, if I can call it that. So for today's session, we have on our panel called Energy Dialogues, the Geopolitics of Energy in Africa, moderated by Dr. Sara, joined along with her fellow speakers, Dr. Lars, Erik Prince, and C. Derek Campbell. Over to you, Dr. Sara.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm very excited about our panel. When I proposed this panel was right after we heard no from US government on receiving finance for our project, which is bringing mini-grid solar panels to one of the African countries. As we're excited, it's us, our Japanese partner, we reach out to the US government, they tell us this is an excellent project, just let us know what are the parts of your small mini-grid solar panels made of. And then we're listing the countries. Obviously, China is among those countries. Where are most of the solar panels and batteries made? In China, and obviously the most affordable. And when we are looking into powering communities that they have less access or no access, they're most of the time, communities that they cannot afford having very expensive, they cannot pay a large bill for their electricity, so affordability is a key. Well, we could not get the finance because there's no human rights in China, and US companies cannot get government finance for any projects that has Chinese part. What is the solution? We can go find American or maybe another non-Chinese parts, but they're more expensive. So it's very interesting. As we are sitting here, we just had the COP26 pass. We have all the leaders getting together talking about energy transition, transiting from coal, oil, and gas to renewable energy, to EVs, to all sort of fancy technologies, which are very expensive and often not affordable. But we have no other choice than also look into that transition because of the issues we are facing with global warming. So when they asked me, what do you want to talk about? I said geopolitics of energy. Then I was so fortunate to be joined by other very highly respected experts in this panel that we are going to touch upon different issues. You already, I'm sure you already know about the speakers in a great amount of details. They are highly qualified. They have a very impressive background. I know whatever I say, I'm not going to introduce them in a fair manner. I'm going to leave them to tell us why they are here today and tell us what they have to tell us. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Lars. He's going to have a presentation for us today about his background is both in the academic. He's have a high academic credentials. He has written books, very interesting articles. I had a pleasure of meeting him in person yesterday. We had a very nice discussion. He passed me some of his articles that are coming up in a peer-reviewed journals, but also he's working in coal industry. He's not a climate change denial, but he's going to tell us some very interesting facts that are actually scary. And then we have Derek with us, my old friend from Washington, D.C. We have worked together on different projects and different studies on energy security. I look at it from market perspective. He looks at it from critical infrastructure security and cybersecurity. So I'm going to invite Lars to give us the presentation, and then we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep. All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's see if we're going to get a couple of slides up. Perfect. Yeah, so just a few more words. So you're right, I'm sort of the combination of an energy economist, and actually my main job is commodity trading. And we do primarily coal and ore products and those kind of things. It's a listed company in Germany. It's a family business. And I joined about 20 years ago. And before I joined, I told my family, I'm like, I'm never going to do coal. Who needs coal? 20 years ago, right? And here I am. In the meantime, I've learned a lot about the business. And a few things I want to share today actually relevant to, I'm going to skip all that, relevant to our discussion on geopolitics. And let me first start with some good news. This is the annual death rate from natural disasters by decade over the past 100 years. You can click on the link down there. It's online and it's not in dispute. Actually, the per capita death from natural disasters has substantially reduced in the past 100 years. And why? Because we have access to energy the way we didn't have. We have got capability to withstand natural disasters much better today than we had in the past. Of course, the actual number of deaths has probably gone up, right? But as we've gone from 2 billion to 8 billion, most of the numbers you see out there are actual numbers. They're not numbers relative to GDP or relative to population. And this is not in dispute. The world has gotten better. However, you may sometimes see only the last 20 years, and there's a slight increase. And that's what you tend to sometimes see in the press. But practically, the world is by far safer and better than it was before. We still have many, many issues. This is, by the way, Germany, my own country. I am from Germany. There was a big flood disaster this year, and everybody was talking about, oh my God, this has never happened before. And of course, it's not true. It has happened before. But it doesn't mean that these things are not bad. They're very bad, and we have to continue to work to make them better. We talk about energy today, and what's important for you to understand the difference between primary energy and electricity. Right? So primary energy, roughly 80% from fossil fuels. Electricity actually only makes up about 40% of primary energy. The rest is basically heating, transportation, industrial energy. And the current transition is about increasing electricity dramatically and using the electricity for part of the transportation, all those things, including EVs. Right? And that's when we come into the electricity part, which is about 60% coal and gas. Today, and there's a bit of nuclear, some petroleum and other things. We talk about that. Wind and solar had 3% of primary energy and 8% of global electricity. We tend to forget these numbers. Now, this is primary energy over the past 170 years. And we were all green, right? We all used to burn only biomass. I mean, Europe didn't have any trees left. In parts of Africa, you don't have any trees left, right? Because they're all chopped down. It's all green, it's all biomass. The Industrial Revolution allowed us to basically start to become much more efficient in the use of our energy and actually in building machinery to allow the wealth, the development of humankind. Oil and gas came, the nuclear force came, nuclear energy, which is actually still a very small fraction of total energy. It's important because when we talk about geopolitics, we have to understand the background of what energy is and where energy comes from, where energy goes to. And again, we talked about wind and solar and fossil fuels. So fossil fuels, 80%. So today, in the global warming discussion, we are told or we are advised to stop funding immediately all fossil fuels. That basically means stop funding 80% of energy and fund only wind and solar. Now you can tenfold increase wind and solar for me. You get to 30%. However, you actually get to less because we're going to have a significant growth in energy demand in the next 30 years. And there's various models out there, and even the IEA has a model out there that the primary energy will drop by 10% in the next 30 years, which is actually 10 years. It's completely impossible. Being a coal guy, of course, 1/3 of electricity is from coal and 1/4 of primary energy is from coal. Now, the growth in energy will come from per capita increase, obviously, right? I mean, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, all the African nations are going to try to come up to a similar level where the Western nations are, and it can come from population increase. Very simple. So even though you will have efficiency increases, you will have dramatic increase requirement in energy. And now we talk about triple, tenfold increase wind and solar for me. Now you get a sense that they will not even give you enough energy just for the growth. So we will need to invest in fossil fuels, and the fossil fuel industry has to start push back significantly, independent of what your view is on climate change. Right? It's just, we're just talking about security of energy supply, and we talk about geopolitics, what that means going forward. Now, I want to introduce to you one concept that's important and not much talked about in the economical or policy discussions on energy, and that's what I call energy return on investment. The energy return on investment basically measures how efficient you are in generating your energy. How much energy you put in to get out. Right? If I put 1 unit of energy in and I get 10 units of energy out, I'm quite good. Now, I didn't put exact numbers here because these numbers are not clear, but nuclear is the most efficient. Has an EROI of about 70 to 80. 1 unit of energy in to build the equipment, to get the uranium out, to upgrade all those things, gets me 75 units of energy out. Now, hydro is quite efficient. It's about 30 times. So you put, you build all these dams and, do all these changes. And then there's coal and gas, which is almost as high as hydro, a little bit lower. Now you may ask, why would we use energy technology that actually is less efficient than this? Right? Well, there's many reasons. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but some of them has to do with money. This tends to be very, very expensive for various reasons. Now, hydro is more expensive than coal and gas. Coal and gas is the cheapest today. And so the reason why we choose less efficient ways of producing energy has to do with money, not only. Now, wind and solar and other biomass is down here. And people are not aware of this. Wind and solar, or renewable technology, depends on, the energy input, which is the sun or the wind. And the energy return on investment for wind and solar is about 3 to 4 in Europe, 2, maybe in Germany it's 2. You put 1 unit of energy in to get 2 units of energy out. What does it mean? That means when I build a solar panel in Germany, in my own country, that solar panel, let's say it lasts 20 years, will need 10 years to give me the energy back it took to build itself. That's what it means. And that is now, you understand, I'm not against renewables, trust me. I'm just, from an economical point of view, we're going into a hugely inefficient way to try to save the world from whatever we were supposed to be saved on. We just saw the numbers. Right? Now, this is very, very expensive, even though we're told that it's supposedly very, very cheap. And we can have a discussion later on this. I'm going to go into detail here. But wind and solar are always more expensive than fossil fuels or conventional ways of producing energy. That has to do with this low EROI, because you actually need to put much more energy materials in. It has to do with the intermittency, has to do with the short lifetime, has to do with the recycling needs afterwards, right? Has to do with energy density and all those things. Now, to sustain modern society, it is told that we need a minimum EROI of about 8 to 10. So actually, wind and solar are below the cutoff level for what we need to sustain modern society. You cannot have art, you cannot have culture, you cannot have hospitals without being energy efficient. We're becoming energy inefficient. And this discussion is not being had. This is not about denying anything. This is about factual, it's about facts. Yeah? Now, nuclear has relatively low material input, relatively low space requirement. Hydro has higher material input, actually, per unit of output, has medium space requirements. Coal and gas has low material input and low space requirements, and wind and solar have high material input and high space requirement. And this is actually what we talk about. This is also environment, right? It should be. Huh? It actually very much is. And of course, technology will improve these things and get them better. But the technology can only do so much. Wind and solar is limited by how much energy you get per square meter. There's only so much energy that the sun puts out here, which tends to be very little in Germany, especially at night. Okay? So even if the solar panels become 100% efficient, it's impossible, otherwise you would be, perpetuum mobile. Then you would increase the efficiency, maybe you double it, maybe, if you're lucky. but you're not going to get to the old levels. There's a very important concept that I would love you to bring into your organizations and into your discussions, but is not discussed. So today's wind and solar are not the solution. They cannot be. In fact, they will lead to energy scarcity. Because of this, if you try to, at grid scale, I'm talking grid scale, large scale, macroeconomically, change our energy system to what they call renewable, you are going to run into energy scarcity. In my view, completely impossible to avoid. You talk about storage, all those things, because that's what it needs. That's why the cost is so high, right? Because you need always a backup system. Every solar panel needs to have a backup. Every single one. Every windmill needs to have a backup. Every single one. That backup is either coal or gas. Nuclear is tough to back up because you kind of ramp it up or down. Or you need a hydrogen or battery or all those things. Right? Now, and that will lead to geopolitical conflict. So energy scarcity will lead to geopolitical conflict. That's the discussion we have today. Primary energy in Africa, South Africa is all coal, right? Northern Africa is basically oil and gas, and then of course the rest of the country is still chopping woods, right? Okay, so that's where we are today, and that's what Africa is doing. And now I can show you wind maps, and I can show you solar maps. I can show you there's no wind in Africa. Yeah? In fact, I will do it shortly. This is what the IEA projects for South Africa. South Africa today, this is electricity only. Electricity is up here. Oops. It's all coal. And they're projecting 40% demand increase in the next 20 years. And they're projecting that coal will go down from 220 terawatt hours to 140 terawatt hours. And the rest will basically be, and the rest will be wind and solar. If South Africa does that, the same will happen what happened in Germany, except worse. In Germany, costs are the highest in the world. Energy security is at an all-time low. We're going to have blackouts in the next 3 to 7 years when they turn off the nuclear in addition to the coal. That's going to happen here, and you can imagine in South Africa what happens, right? So there's significant geopolitical issues with doing that. Now, talking about, you mentioned China before, Sara. Solar panel, China's share in global polysilicon production has risen to 75%. That's how much the solar industry is controlled by China, right? And there's a massive expansion increase, right? Bloomberg said how China beat the US to become the world's undisputed solar champion, right? China's solar dominance, President Biden with ugly dilemma. South Korean manufacturers have abandoned the production of solar-grade materials. US-based have mothballed their production of solar. So basically, if you go solar, you are going to basically move from coal, oil, gas-dependent economy to a Chinese-dependent economy. Because you need to replace these solar panels every 15 to 20 years. Actually, probably even sooner, because after 15 years, the technology is so new, you say, no, I'm going to get rid of my old solar panels after 10 years, because now I have a newer one. I'm going to get it for free, basically, because I have free money, and I'm going to replace my solar panels after 10 years. Even though in theory, they could last 22 years, whatever. So consequently, China has share in global polysilicon production has increased from 50% in 2017, and 4 years ago, to 75%. Now, the situation in wind is not the same. To dominate the wind industry is not as easy, even though Chinese share in the global wind demand market is over 50% already. And that has to do that actually these things are often domestically manufactured. However, some of the components of the wind, the rare earth for the magnets and all those things, do depend on China. So wind turbines are not a commodity product the same way they are that the solar panels are. They have 22 major components, 8,000 subcomponents, and it's much more distributed in the supply chain. Yeah? And right now, by the way, 60% of the blades are used in Denmark's Vestas turbine are manufactured domestically, locally, not domestically, but in the European Union. However, there are some subcomponents where the Chinese do have a near monopoly. Okay. This is the wind map for Europe. A lot of wind. You can go online, globawindatlas.com. That's the wind map for Asia, the same wind map. There's no wind in Asia. There's no wind in China. There's no wind in Southeast Asia. A little bit, of course, there is, but there's not enough wind because all the wind is in the north and the south of the Earth and not in the middle. This is the wind map for India. No wind. This is the windmill for Africa. You get my point. Wind is not even close to a solution because these low wind factors mean that you have a low what you call capacity factor. That means you install 100 megawatt of wind and you get out 10%, 10 megawatt of power on average over the year, but you don't know when you get it because the wind may stop. Now let's go to electric vehicles. Talk about energy densities. I love electric vehicles. I love driving them. It's amazing. And to be honest, the electric engine, you see, there's a reason why trains on average are electric and not diesel powered anymore, because actually they're the most efficient way of converting power into transportation. Oh yeah, that doesn't look so nice. Thanks. So the electric engine actually is a very efficient way of when you have energy in form of electricity to convert it into motion. Electric engine is much better than a combustion engine. The issue is, of course, that a train or a bus, they have a what they call a line. They run on path, right? You can easily electrify them. And with normal transportation, you and I driving around, that's easy. Difficult. Now that Tesla has 85 to 100 kilowatt hour capacity that weighs about half a ton. Just the battery, right? Just the battery. 85 kilowatt hour are contained in 30 kilograms of coal. 30 kilograms of coal that I combust in a power plant has 85 kilowatt hours. That gives you a sense of energy densities. It's not a fair comparison because the battery you can charge 100 times or 1,000 times, and the coal, it's also a battery, but you only combust it once. But it gives you a sense of energy densities. The energy densities of hydrocarbons, coal, oil, and gas, is so high from nature that you cannot virtually build these things. If you do, that's what happens. Now, it's an energy density factor of 40 after efficiency of about 18. What's even more interesting is that, and being in Africa is, let's be generous and let's halve the battery weight to 250 kilograms. So let's say we're going to be so efficient in the future, we're going to weigh half. But actually 1 to 2% of the mined ore products, cobalt, lithium, manganese, all these things, only a fraction of the mined metal, mined ore, ends up in the metal in the battery. It's actually 1 to 2%. So now you need 13 to 25 tons of raw material to be mined, processed, and transported, mostly in China, to get that battery. We haven't talked about CO2 yet, right? Okay. Lithium, copper, cobalt, nickel, graphite, rare earth, bauxite, coal, iron ore for the aluminum and the steel. Right? I need 30 grams of coal. Right? I only need to mine 30 grams of coal. Now you're talking about a material input factor of 450 to almost 1,000. And that's environment. That's what I called material input, remember earlier in the slide. Now, I haven't talked about energy input factor, energy return on investment, and I haven't talked about recycling efficiency. So you get the point that if you change a transportation system to an electric transportation system with today's technology, even if the technology doubles or triples or becomes even much more efficient, you're not going to do the environment a favor. It has nothing to do with global warming. I can talk about that for hours as well. Now, the lithium production, who is winning, right? In 2017, 2020, in 4 years or in 3 years, the US increased their megafactories from 3 to 9, right? And they had 0 graphite anode plants. At the same time, China increased from 9 to 107 battery megafactories. 53 were active as per last year, and 48 graphite anode plants. Global demand for nickel will double in the next 10 years. Cobalt will triple. Graphite manganese will grow 4 times. Lithium will grow 6 times. You get the point. Right. China's the EV supply chain. In terms of mining, China's share for graphite is actually quite high. For the other ones, not that high. Africa is very important. On the chemical processing side, 90, 60, 100, 80, 65% of global capacity. We ourselves trade lithium. We buy lithium from Rwanda and from DRC. We upgrade a little bit. It's going to put in a container, ship to China. In a 2-stage process, upgrade to the first stage with coal power, second stage with coal power. Then you get lithium, pure lithium. Then they put the lithium into a battery, and if you're lucky, they do that in Europe or in the US. And then they build the Tesla out of it. And then after 5 or 6 years, that stuff comes back to Africa in form of trash. That's what I call circular economy. Yeah. This is the cathode and anode production, 80%, 60% of the global supply. And this is the battery cell manufacturing, 70% in China. So I think set the stage for the discussion on geopolitics. We can talk more about energy security issues, right? But these fundamental shifts in dependency on the energy system are substantial, and they're huge, and it will make a big, big difference in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of how the geopolitical world will work. Okay, I'll leave it by there, and then if there are questions, we have more. Okay.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Many interesting issues were discussed. The most important one is the dual challenge that we are facing. From one side, the population of the Earth is growing. From the other side, we have to increase the energy production, which means carbon production. And that's why most of the politicians, I'm not talking about the experts or academics, they are suggesting that we have to move from fossil fuels toward renewable energy. But what matters is exactly why some of us in the energy industry love our president back in the US, is that he engineered a plan that the world is becoming way more dependent to China. The only consequence for us as US business owners is that we are sanctioned from entering into emerging markets, because not having Chinese manufactured batteries or solar panels in our components means that we have to have higher cost, more expensive components that most communities cannot pay for that. So that also pushes us back from those markets. But the other issue that is also very important, and Lars touched upon that, is the efficiency of solar and wind, and the space that they required. And I'm sure that he could tell us more about the food security, because having all our ground filled with solar panel, where are we going to have those lands that we need for agriculture? Then we also have other issues like affordability that I mentioned. We are putting a higher cost production of energy that, again, some communities, some people, different part of the world cannot pay for that. And energy transition is a costly transition with the current technologies. Obviously, we cannot predict the technologies coming. Now there is a big discussion about hydrogen. Some of the African countries are very much interested in green hydrogen, which is very costly. And again, many questions remain in the whole chain of the hydrogen to fuel. Something that very interestingly came up to his conversation, no one really discussed that, is that when in one country we are burning coal or gas or oil for power or heating purposes or transportation, we have carbon produced, yes. But with lithium batteries, where the trash goes.
And how are they produced?
How they're produced and where it goes. A trash goes back to Africa.
Of course.
And who's benefiting them? So these lithium batteries that I drive, an EV, let's say in Washington, D.C., the trash is disposed in Africa, and that did not even produce any energy for the people of Africa, that they're just hosting those disposable. And recycling the wind turbine blades, recycling those solar panels is also another energy intensive process. We need not only so much energy to produce that, but also a lot of energy to recycle them. So there are very interesting issues came up, and the final and very important part that we could connect it into our geopolitics of energy is the strategic resources and minerals. Where are these rare earth materials are coming? China is hosting a huge amount of these resources, but also outside of China, most of these resources are somehow already, the mines are already long-term agreements with Chinese to either produce them or process them. So the world is becoming dependent the dependency is moving from different countries in OPEC plus US and Russia to only China, maybe US, maybe Russia. So to smaller number of countries with having China a huge share in that providing the minerals. So as we are all excited about energy transition as a solution, we think, that could save the environment, obviously generation to come, but what it is lacking now is a technology or an actual solution that is sustainable, affordable, and also good for our environment. Because obviously, if we need a huge amount of strategic resources to produce that solar panel, we are still using energy in mining sector. We are still using all those energy that Lars did that economic calculation for us in that slide he has, that how much energy is going to producing units of energy from different types of energy. So a lot of food for thoughts, a lot of issues to think and discuss. I'm interested to move to Derek. Derek has been working on different capacity. He has some hands and studies on strategic minerals, but also he has an extensive background in security of critical infrastructure, which is very important in the era of energy transition, because as we are moving from more manual, traditional infrastructure to more smart infrastructure, then these smart infrastructures are getting more vulnerable to cyber attacks and the effect on the end user. So Derek, I leave that to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. As Sarah said, I've got a background in natural resources. So commercially, as an American businessman, I get involved in three principal things: energy, natural resources, and infrastructure. And we approach that from an advisory position. We approach it from an asset acquisition position. And we approach it from a security position as well. I got to tell you, Lars, that brief was quite sobering. One of the things that my platforms do and my teams do is that we focus in the emerging and frontier markets, but with a particular keen interest and eye on what is happening in Africa. I think you may have heard me mention this yesterday, Lars and Sara, and I'll vector some of what we're talking about to be specific about Africa and specific between the nexus. You talk about geopolitics, right? Of my country, the United States, and how it engages Africa. One of the fundamental things that I think, and you know we talk about this often in Washington, that Americans need to understand about this continent is that it is not a place to go exploit resources. It is a place to go partner so we could build relationships to help bring a global population to a state of existence where we can start to commercially interact, compete, engage. It is difficult for Africa as a continent to engage the United States from a trade perspective, from a technology transfer perspective, from even a tourism perspective. Why? Because we've created an imbalance in the global system where you have a situation where you have this thing that the African Energy Chamber calls energy poverty, which impacts Africans writ large across the continent, their ability to engage the West, in particular the United States. And so one of those things that I hope comes out of a talk like this, particularly with the data points that you presented, Lars, is that Africans start to take a front seat driver role, right, in how they not only create a narrative about, wait a minute, we have something to say about some of these data points and these issues, but then they start to develop both continental, regional, and then nation-based policies on how do we properly exploit our resources to do what? Create enough baseload power so we can build industry. To do what else? To do that on a regional level, and the why, to develop a strong why behind that. And that why would be to bring Africans to a point where they get to become competitive in the global economy. So back to the United States and why this is important to the United States. I mentioned this yesterday. You have a nation, my nation has 80 to 100 million of its citizens in my almost 400 million plus country that are of African descent genetically, right? And we as a nation have a problem in terms of maintaining a pole position on this continent with our near peer competitors, and you know who they are, right? No offense to you, my Russian friends in the corner. So the issue is this geopolitically. You take a look at the data sets that Lars articulated. You look at some of the commercial challenges that Sara has talked about. And then you look at a guy like me as a US businessman who wants to come and partner in Africa. Sometimes I just can't, we can't do things that are impactful, both commercially for us as Americans and then from an optimization standpoint for our potential African partners, because we have problems. And those problems are the types of problems that Lars talked about, which is no industry, no baseload power, no economy, no cars, no DHL, no FedEx, those types of things. And so there's a real impact when we start to be very ideal. I don't want to say idealistic, that's not the right word. I'll say futuristic, condescendingly futuristic about how we create an energy narrative globally that is completely ignorant of the data points that Lars is talking about. And this energy scarcity thing that he is talking about with respect to this continent not only impacts the continent, but it impacts my country, right? It impacts my people, the West, and it also impacts the East, right? Because now you have what? A continual dynamic where we have an entire continent left in the third world, and this energy poverty thing becomes worse and worse over time. It doesn't get better and better. So, my hope is that when we have discussions like this, those folks who are on the renewable side of let me take that back. Those policy developers in Africa who have a lot of pressure on them about having a better energy mix that matches maybe some OECD country, that they do some internal reflection and say, hey, that sounds great to want to do that, but is that realistic for me and my country and my region and my people as I try to bring them up to be competitive and engaging with the rest of the world? So,
thank you, Derek.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, we have Erik Prince also joining us, and we're looking forward to having your presentation.
Okay. Good morning. Is this mic work? Good. Yeah. As I sit here listening to the other talks given, it certainly reminds me of how badly Africa needs energy. I've traveled and worked extensively across the continent, and I find the attitude of the globalists that will lecture to Africa to turn away from hydrocarbons as it's immoral. It's wrong. When you have real energy poverty across the continent, as they lecture you from their Tesla or their Gulfstream, I'm incredulous at their ability or their attitude to do that. And Africa really needs to maximize the use of their hydrocarbons right now, because it is a fading asset. If the green revolution is real, and if there really is a shift towards wind and solar and more hydro, then that hydrocarbon BTU becomes a little bit worth a little bit less every day. So move fast to maximize that earning power for your own people. As you look for capital, even if the very woke, politically correct hedge fund managers in New York are trying to steer away from hydrocarbons, there is a massive pool of capital that still remains in America amongst family offices, even amongst the LPs, the limited partners of those hedge funds. They still demand good returns, not hopeful, just green returns. And so you may have to alter your fundraising strategy or how you face the market to raise capital in the West. But believe me, there's a lot of capital there that still seeks actual, real, valid returns. So again, I heard the minister from Equatorial Guinea yesterday talked about the capital of energy in America is Houston. It's not Washington D.C. And so I agree. I was proud to tell him that we were original investors in the fund that drilled the first holes in Equatorial Guinea, which unlocked the energy for that country. And those were wildcatters. Those were wildcatters from Texas, literally from the Wildcatter Hall of Fame. A lot of those guys have moved on. They've moved out of the large oil companies. They have a lot more independence now, and those are the people you need to seek to, because just like you have frustrations in dealing with large governments, the super majors, the major oil companies have largely become safety organizations that produce oil once in a while as a byproduct. The independent, the wildcatter, the people that built the oil industry in America, that attitude, that the willingness to take the risk is still there. You just have to figure out how to tap it. And it's a different strategy than a Washington-based strategy or even a New York-based strategy. But those investors, whether it's a family office or other institutional LPs, will expect transparency, of course, and they'll expect security. Just like you buy an insurance policy for your project, you will need to maintain and show that you can secure their asset, because they're literally investing their own money. It's not even third-party money. I would say that sadly, as I look at the parts of Africa that are still really suffering and bleeding from insurgency, from rampant criminality, the Western model of security assistance, I think, has largely failed. The images of the U.S. departure from Afghanistan after a 20-year failure is a really bad look, and it's not. I don't blame the rank and file U.S. soldiers. I certainly blame the leadership that never was able to adapt a strategy for pacifying and for bringing peace to the country, and that management of conflict instead of ending conflict, that attitude has been allowed to persist across the globe, whether it's, of course, in Iraq or in Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, across the Sahel. It's this management of kind of kicking the can down the road instead of putting the fire out completely. That's a real problem. And your countries largely are the ones that suffer from it the most. It's easy for policymakers in Brussels or in Washington to kick the can down the road, but it's and many of your countries that are suffering from the direct results of the underinvestment and the chaos that reigns. When I look at even what happened in South Sudan, my old company was contacted right after the original comprehensive peace agreement back in, was that 2002 or 3? Or it was 2005. They wanted security, and they wanted a reliable aircraft for John Garang to go up to Khartoum to finally make peace. And blocked by the State Department, blocked by the same bureaucracies that wanted to kick the can down the road. And we said, if we don't protect Garang, the Khartoum regime will take him out, and it'll probably be with an aircraft. And sure enough, within 2 months, he mysteriously died in a helicopter crash. So my point is, the private sector, you would never go to the Department of Energy in America if you wanted to drill a well. You go to the private sector. You expect the innovation, the boldness, the adaptability to come from the private sector. That capability is there in the private sector to help you put out the fire. You don't have to only go to the U.S. military or to Brussels. The nation-state solution for putting out these fires, if you can't look back at the last 20 years and say, well, these same conflicts are still going that were burning 20 years ago are still burning today, that is, it's unlike any time in history, because usually insurgencies can flare and someone puts them out and they're on and people are back to living their normal lives. This conflict management, the way the West has been doing it, to me is unacceptable. It is unnecessary because the fire can be put out. Just like you have the frustration of dealing with a super major, that they become very bureaucratic, the same nation-state attitude cannot adapt quickly enough to manage the issues, whether it's a local irate people that are being displaced by an energy project. The private sector can deal with them and assuage those concerns and provide them medical help and clean water and all the other things to keep them happy and on board. It's one of the things I've noticed that when the Chinese do projects, they tend to bring with them everything from China, and it becomes a little China bubble, and they don't manage well how they interact with the local communities. They tend to not buy much. I mean, they bring everything with them from the barber to the cooks to everything they can. And so the Western companies that operate, whether they're Australian, Canadian, British, even some of the U.S. operations, they do much better job of managing that community relation. And so they depend and leverage the private sector to do that. As you get greater into the concerns of organized theft, organized crime, all the way up to full-blown insurgencies, please remember that the private sector can ramp up to help you put out that fire and to keep it at bay and to protect that investment, just like a proper insurance policy. Whether it's the organized crime theft of oil in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, to the Boko Haram problem still killing people at a systematic way in the north, to the problems in the Sahel after the fall of Gaddafi 10 years ago because of a Western intervention that unleashed all those weapons out of Gaddafi's arsenals, that leaked weapons all over the Sahel. The entire region is still suffering from it. And again, private sector can help put that fire out. In Mozambique, I'm particularly sorry to see what's happening there because you have the largest natural gas deposit in the world, new one, coming in on stream, doing well, and then out of nowhere, an insurgency explodes. I can't prove it, but if I was a betting man, I would say that was a sponsored insurgency. And I look at the countries who benefits if Mozambique as a new field gets knocked offline. I would say it's one of the countries that within the next 3 years will have 70% of its production on the spot market. That's lost. Its long-term contracts have expired. Insurgencies in Africa like that don't explode overnight. That one did, and I can't prove it yet, but I will. I'll let you know. I hope the Rwandans have success at putting the fire out, but the jury's out on that. So, in Somalia, enormous. You know, the same geology that runs from Mozambique up the east coast of Africa extends to Somalia as well. Enormous oil and gas potential, onshore and offshore. Can't do it because of a lingering Islamic insurgency. The U.S. government spends hundreds of millions of dollars there a year, but yet no one puts the fire out. And it's sad, but the private sector can rally and do that job if given the chance. It's interesting to see how the great powers are addressing these challenges. The Russians have defaulted to what they do well. They've always delivered a lot of weaponry, and now they've certainly added a true private military company component to that with the Wagner Group and a lot of other subsidiaries like that. They were very effective in a hybrid war approach in Ukraine, seizing Crimea in the Donbass region, in Syria, in Libya, Central African Republic, in Mozambique, Madagascar, in Venezuela. So they're active and they're providing that because nature hates a vacuum. And if the West isn't going to fill that, the Russians will certainly try. The Chinese show up with a lot of money. They show up with a lot of promise for infrastructure. They need the resources. You know, with the urbanization in China, you have in the next 10 years, you have another 300 million people that will move from the countryside into the cities. So imagine building the entire housing stock of America again in 10 years. Of course, that requires a lot of iron ore and all the other minerals to just build the housing, the roads, the power infrastructure to do that. An interesting way that the private sector could help developing countries as well is basically do an audit on a lot of these big infrastructure projects that the Chinese have promised, and help those countries market to market, and help those countries, I would say, call BS on some of the debt load that they have, because China's method is to be the kind of the lender of only resort, and so they tend to overcharge, and we could help squeeze down that debt load on those countries and help them restructure their payments. But so the Chinese have not figured out how to project power the way the Russians have. The Western private sector is very, very capable, but largely restrained from helping in the ways it could. The Turks have even turned to the private sector and used it significantly in Syria and in Libya as well. So countries will turn to this as a default more and more. It is not a new thing. It is the oldest form of warfare. When you look at the advance of technology and insurgents or criminal gangs, whether it's the cartels in Latin America having the most sophisticated technology, whether it's drones and encrypted communications, night vision, long-range precision weapons, to ISIS adopting basically DJI drones off the shelf and making them effectively precision mortar bombers. The criminal or insurgent class will always be adaptive, and so whatever you're going to use to protect and to assure your investors a return, the security capacity has to adapt faster than they do and be able to operate inside that decision loop. The comment about the transition from hydrocarbon energy to a lot more green energy. Also important to note that the next race is for those minerals. China controls 95% of the processing of all the rare earths that you need for the electric motors, for the battery technology, and so the West has to figure out, has to wake up and say they're going to take some selective capacity back into the United States, and this is where there are limits to what the free market is if you're competing against a country that has a very managed free market in the sense that they will pick winners and subsidize industries to drive them out. I mean, even the only producing rare earth mine in America, which is in California, all the processing of those minerals goes to China. So again, a $1 billion or less check, and you could build that processing capacity in the United States somewhere and pick some, or in the West. But again, as Africa becomes again a point of competition from whether it's hydrocarbon, which I'm all in favor of, maximizing the production today, but as more and more the demand, whether it's cobalt and the other rare earths that are coming out of the DRC and elsewhere, competing for processing to locate in Africa is very, very important, and it will maximize the technology and the employment and the future productivity and the future prosperity of the continent. And so I think Africa, each individual country needs to flex up and to maximize what's in their national interest and not necessarily listen to what the globalists are telling them, but they have to maximize the return for their own citizens. Thank you.
So it's my takeaway from your talk, which is very interesting and unfortunate, is that how different players in the game pose a threat and create havoc in different parts just because of all this money involved and make each other's asset insecure. That was, in my mind, for me, the most interesting part, that how these insecurities are being made. And I know, Derek, you just mentioned you like to talk about money and that how this money is flowing.
Really, money and security, right? I want to vector in on something you said initially, Erik, which is really kind of key, and this is for the African partners in the room, and you've probably seen this multiple times. One of the challenges that we've had in terms of trying to provide security infrastructure support, so to speak, to African nations, particularly around their critical energy infrastructure, is that they see security as more of a cost than an investment. And it would be really good if at the policy level, African nations, whether it be at the ministerial level or at the NOC level, really start to vector their thought process on the investment that they make in security versus looking at it as a cost and ultimately reacting to some of the challenges that they would have in the field, like in Nigeria with the pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. Why is that key? It's back to really the initial point you said, which is you need to look at the security as an insurance policy for the money. Because as you know, in New York and other capital markets, there is money on the sideline that wants to get into Africa to help develop some of the projects that you have trying to come online. And having to always go to DFIs and deal with some of the policy issues you had to deal with in terms of not being able to have the right solar panels, things like that. There's commercial money out there that really wants to get into this market. But you got to have, as Erik has articulated, the right security regimes in place to help protect that investment to make sure to get a good ROI.
Okay. So I think...
Let me ask one other comment.
Yeah.
As you're scoping a project, you know who your driller is going to be. First of all, you know who your geoscience people are. You know who your seismic people are. You know who your driller is. You know who your production guys are. To defer the security, right, the underlying insurance policy for the whole project to a local government's military or police forces is that's a stretch, and I think it's wise to be careful to do that, because in most of these countries where they are not used to performing at the level that you would expect of your driller or your seismic crew and everything else, to outsource the security and the underlying insurance for the entire project to a generally underfunded, under-resourced, under-trained security organization is an error that people don't make more than once.
Well, I think the root to that Erik, you just mentioned, is that perhaps the countries don't know where the threat is coming from. So when you start a project, you're like, this is inside our own territories, we have our own forces, we're going to protect it. But what was mentioned is some more interesting factor is, like, if you look at East Med gas, or the example of Mozambique, if the countries, the authorities are briefed that what are the potential rivals, what are the potential risks that could be posed against those countries, I think there would be then different stories for them. Because when you're looking into your own sovereign, you look at the risk on who can attack this infrastructure, what can happen. In some countries relatively are more stable. But then if you have a perception of, okay, how things are moving, how other players in game or rivals could pose a threat, then the story could be different.
And we see that a lot in what's called lack of domain awareness, right? From an internal security perspective, what we see is that a lot of African nations don't have the information operations capability to shape a narrative, or the indications and warning capability to understand what the narrative is about things that are happening internally. And so there's this lack of domain awareness, again, driven by the fact that sometimes at the ministerial level, at the IOC level, the NOC level, they see security as a cost versus an investment. And so it then causes these types of challenges to make them unaware about the atmospherics that are happening around their critical energy infrastructure.
Yeah, I think they would still spend, but it's just like how you define that, like
That's right. Better to
preparedness.
spend.
You need to know what is that threat and how.
Better to spend proactively than reactively. Right?
So if there's no other points that you guys want to mention, I think it's opening for the questions, because there are so many interesting things have been mentioned from the first presentation till now. I just ask you, please introduce yourself and say that whom you're directing your question to. Do we have mics that we could? Yes, the gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Hill. This question is actually for the Washington Times. But Erik talked about terror groups across Africa. One of the things that I've seen as I move around looking at some of these groups is they seem to have business empires now that go around them. Illicit tobacco, fake Scotch whiskey that you can't tell apart from Johnny Walker, smuggling of diamonds, smuggling of people. Is it true? Are some of these terror groups now business concerns that are woven into the local economy, and does that make it more difficult to counteract them?
In the example of Somalia, right? Shabab funds itself with cot trafficking with phone cards. They take a tax on all the scratch cards across the country, and they actually tax the farmers all through the Juba and Shabelle River Valley, where much of the farming agriculture is in Somalia. So they have to fund themselves somehow, and that's how they do it. So yes, I would say Shabab is half criminal enterprise that cloaks itself in jihad as a recruiting tool, as a common rallying point, but again, one that can and should be defeated. I would even say that the U.S., the Western counterterrorism approach for the last 20 years has been always to look at the top of the pyramid and thinking, drone strike, drone strike, drone strike, that if we just take out the leader, the whole thing will wither and go away, ignoring the fact that the body still remains, and the body always regrows another head or 3 heads. And wars are won when you take out the enemy's logistics, their manpower, and their recruiting. I don't care how good the guy is at the top. If he looks left and looks right and there's nobody left, then it's over. And so that entire, I guess, the lure of technology for the West and thinking of surgical precision warfare, in my mind, has proven to be a failure.
Thank you. Okay, there's a gentleman.
Thank you so much. My name is Koila Manaing. I'm from the Kingdom of Lesotho. I'm a master's researcher in climate change and sustainable development at the University of Cape Town. It's quite interesting. I was at COP26. Before that, I was in Milan. And you're actually right, Lars. Half of what you said on that screen regarding energy efficiency aren't the types of conversations that we're having at that level, and I really wonder why. And I think a lot of it is geopolitics, and I think at the core, I'm a realist. And I think my question is to both of you. How do we unlock that potential for this type of energy when our governments are actually the ones who are the barriers to entry? And I looked at some of your graphs, and I realized that there was a big deal that Lesotho messed up to do with solar. And I looked at that deal, and I realized that according to your graphs, there was no potential for that solar at all. So how do we bypass, not necessarily our policymakers, our governments? How do we have a private sector to private sector conversation when these people are the same people who take the bribes and become the barriers to entry into unlocking those systems when half of us already know what to do? So thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks. I think when I speak to my friends, they're like, Lars, what are you doing? I'm in the coal industry, right? Get out of this, right? I mean, this is the end. Actually, it's quite the contrary. I'm probably benefiting from this energy transition because the large companies are going to retract, go away from the business. For me, perfect. I'll have more business. The only question, the only challenge I have is the financing, which can be managed, I think, also privately. But I don't think we can change the narrative, and these graphs I put on, they're all out there. But when you mention them, you're right away a denier. I'm like, no, I'm not a denier. I'm just talking about realities. What it actually means is that geopolitically, what will happen? What will happen is that energy will become scarcer and more expensive. And actually, I disagree that you have to get the gas out and oil out fast. In fact, I think it will become more valuable later. Because the longer you wait, the more screwed up the world's going to be with the renewable discussions, all those things, the more valuable is going to be a reliable source of energy. Mm-hmm. So I just put up in Switzerland, I live in Switzerland, I put up an oil generator, a gas diesel generator in my own house. I mean, that's how scared I am in the next 2 to 3 years when Germany turns off nuclear in addition to coal, what's going to happen in Europe. So I think there is only so much that can be done. The narrative seems to be sort of gone out of the way. I think we have to continue to informing people in the industry, our own industry, in your industry, in our industry. People become aware of these economic, energy, environmental facts, which are very important. And then you have to just start, probably lobbying more towards the politicians. The gas industry fought the coal industry on climate change, right? They said, look, we are CO2 better than you. We're half better than you guys are, so come to us. Now they are also shot at. And in fact, actually, gas is worse than coal if you include the methane emissions. So I think it's time that the fossil fuel industry, which is 80% of energy, comes together on this issue and not polemically, not sort of, politically, like just fundamentally, environmentally and economically, what the right thing is. I'm saying, guys, we cannot continue burning fossil fuels for the next 150 years. I'm totally in favor of an energy revolution. That will have to come. But today's technology cannot and will not be the solution. It's impossible, physically impossible. But we have to invest to find a solution. Until then, we have to invest in our existing conventional energy infrastructure to make it better, smarter, more efficient, all those things. And that's what we're missing. We're not putting money into 80%, I mean, not little money into 80% of energy, we're putting all the money into 3% energy, right? And that's a huge mistake, and that's a geopolitical mistake, because in addition to that, what will that do? Actually, it's polarizing the world, right? You have the left green, and you have the right black bad guys, right? I'm not political. I actually grew up in East Germany. I grew up under communism, and I've seen both worlds, and I see advantage, disadvantage on both worlds, right? But this is not about politics, but it's being misused by politics. And if of course, as a large company, you are going to have to play with politics because you need political support for your projects. But this issue of energy security is at the core of what we're going to see in the next decades to come in our world. The world will become polarized, will become less energy secure, will become more expensive, and what it means is that actually development, economic development, will be stifled, will grow down. It will still grow, but grow less. That's not going to be an issue for me in Switzerland. I'm going to be fine. It's going to be a problem for the guys in Africa and Bangladesh and Pakistan, all these guys, because they are going to take slower to get out of poverty. And that's actually, for me, a macroeconomic trend which we have to counteract. And how do we do it? I'm just of the opinion, just continue to informing everyone and learn yourself. How many people of you actually have spent time understanding climate change?
Well, I think there is something that is very important also, is that most of these countries that you mentioned, they don't have an energy roadmap.
Yes, yeah.
You know, the issue is that you need to first know what is your energy security map look like. What do you have, where things are coming, what are your demand in the future? And when you don't have that roadmap, then you're confused. I'm an energy strategist by background, and I advise different countries. I work with government of UAE, Iraq, different countries, Cyprus, to work on their energy strategy roadmap. And if you don't have that, and I've noticed some of the African countries, they have that issues because they're heavily underinvested. There's not enough investment. The first investors go to them and say, I have this brilliant idea, I want to bring green hydrogen to your country. Then they're like, yes, we want green hydrogen in our country. And I'll ask them, what is the economy, what is the plan? They're like, well, there are like 5 companies ready to bid on this project. And most often these projects will start, they never go anywhere because they are not fit into the environment and needs of that country. So one is the energy roadmap, and a good example of that actually is Saudi Arabia. You all, I'm sure, follow the Saudi Aramco IPO. So the dominant narrative is often written to take the future to a direction. So if I sit here, if you're a coffee merchant, and I say, you know, the Ethiopian coffee tomorrow is going to be scarcity of Ethiopian coffee because there is a drought. All of you will go buy because you think in future is going to be more expensive. So oftentimes the dominant narrative is engineered in, I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory, but dominant narrative could create and shape something in future. So most of these oil resource owners, Saudi Arabia having the largest, and Russia, but Saudi Arabia in the OPEC, what happened is that they have all these brilliant, smart Western advisors going to them and say, get rid of your oil assets, divest, sell it, it's worthless. They were so worried that the kingdom is going to be poor because no one wants their oil anymore. So they start running that IPO because they wanted to sell off or like privatize their assets in order to generate money to diversify their economy. What happened, they got the wake-up call. They noticed that. They noticed that that dominant narrative is not in their profit. So what they did, they immediately stopped the process. They did the IPO domestically. They give share to their own people, but still there's no foreign shareholder in their IPO. So Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, and Prince Abdulaziz, I had a pleasure of meeting. He's a very smart I would say maybe the best oil and energy diplomat that we have. He knows exactly what is happening. When he talks to algorithm, he talks to traders, he knows what is happening, and that's what the realization. I like the Saudi Arabia as one of the good examples of energy resource holders that they know what is happening. The other example is Russia. We don't see divestment of, we see Russia investing in petrochemical, because they realize that oil is going to be used more in petrochemical than in the fuel in refineries, because we are going to move toward EVs, and we need less gasoline, more petrochemicals. We still use plastic forever coming from oil. We don't know when it's going to stop. But you don't see Russia divesting from oil and gas. So I think the dominant narrative and having that energy security plan is very key. And most of the countries in Africa, I noticed they need to have that comprehensive vision first of what they have. We have countries that they are sitting on massive resources of uranium. They're looking at green hydrogen, producing hydrogen from solar, but they could just producing that power and hydrogen from their own uranium resources, nuclear power generation.
So just to really kind of drive the narrative home about everything, about your question and about everything that people have talked about up here. At the local level, it's the development of things like energy roadmaps, but it's really driving a very linear, almost arithmetic narrative, which is 1 + 1 = 2. And that is, hey, listen, whether it's Lesotho, whether it's Greater, the Republic of South Africa, or any nation here on the continent, the thing that is going to drive the nation and the populace out of this energy poverty existence, out of a poverty existence, is the development of sustainable baseload power. So you can develop an industry, you can create jobs. And at the end of the day, if you can say, hey, are we doing things in our energy roadmap that help us develop baseload power? Then you'll start to have people rally around that concept, and you'll start to make decisions that are in the best interests of each nation, each region, because you're able to industrialize, you're able to economize, right? And you're also able to take advantage of technology. And so the very linear discussion in Lesotho for you needs to be with the government. Hey, what are we doing to create baseload power? We saw in my country in Texas that they thought when they had a big semi-natural disaster storm that shut down the power grid, they thought that renewables were going to be a great backup for them. Well, they couldn't generate enough baseload power to keep the cities active. This happened in Texas less than 6 months ago in the 21st century, right? So baseload power is the real fundamental cornerstone narrative that each African country needs to talk about. And how do we make that happen? Because so many other things can happen with that.
And there's one point on that. If you have that baseload power and you are worried about CO2, then just do carbon capture and storage. That's the cheapest way. If you really could believe that reducing CO2 will reduce future temperature, which will reduce future sea level rise, which will reduce future extreme events, then capture it from a 20% CO2 stream from your gas or coal plant. Don't try to direct air capture 0.04% of CO2 from the atmosphere, or try to put up solar, which is built with coal, all this power, and try to reduce CO2. I mean, it's just so unlogical, I can't even say. Right? I mean, it's just incredible. So again, the economy is here, the baseload power is the key, and if you are concerned about the CO2, if you're forced to buy whatever you are forced to buy, then okay, spend 20% of your energy to capture the CO2 and put it somewhere in the ground, whatever you have to do.
There are 3 power grids in America: West Coast, East Coast, and Texas. Texas last spring was a few hours away from cataclysmic system-wide shutdown because they never thought that it could be overcast and cold and snowy at the same time in Texas, shutting down all the green energy. And then they were even shutting down the electrical power that was going to the gas fields, which was pumping the gas to keep that base load power. So a circular system failure was very close, and that's in Texas, sitting on all that actual energy, all that hydrocarbon energy in the ground. So don't believe necessarily the green line.
Definitely not.
Sorry.
We got a question back there.
Next question.
Thank you. Paul Burkhardt with Bloomberg News. I have a question for Mr. Prince. We saw Islamic State take responsibility for a lot of the attacks in Mozambique, and we've heard some claims in DRC and also, I guess, even Uganda recently. So I wanted to find out what your analysis is on that, and then also, as the security situation is being handled in Mozambique right now, is it possible to make it secure for those gas projects to continue?
Sure. I would say the ISIS flare-ups across Africa is not a monolithic effort, but more of a local franchise that embraces a criminal enterprise that wraps itself in a uniting theme of a jihad form of Islam. So they can be dealt with on a pocket-by-pocket basis. There certainly is some cross-training, some sharing of information, because when you see different bomb methods, different ambush techniques that show up across those areas, you can see that there's been some common form of communication, but it is not a headquartered organization somewhere. On the Mozambique side, I would say the pressure from the Rwandan military, at least a competent military that's in there, I would say that the insurgents are doing what insurgents do when they face a strong conventional presence, is they fade into the bush for a while. I'm confident they will reemerge because I don't know that they've been pursued, and the fire has not been put out. It's just that the embers have gone into to recess for a bit. But yes, it is possible to do so. A small, light, very fast-moving capability to pursue the enemy, to respond if they have if there is a flare-up, has to be that capability there. And so that's the long-term presence of I don't think Mozambique wants Rwandan soldiers on its soil for years to come. And so what does that stay-behind, quick reaction force, fire brigade look like? And I would say it's mostly a Mozambican force, trained, supported, paid on time, supported with a little bit of air assets, right? Because if the bad guys are moving by foot, you move by vehicle. If they're moving by vehicle, you got to move by air. And so putting some actual key enablers in the hands of the local force under the control of the national authorities, not a private army, but rather I would say a privately mentored and supported organization as part of the national state's ability to defend its resources. I mean, look, the total invest for oil and gas in Mozambique is $65 billion. It's an enormous number. It's going to change potentially the future of Mozambique and even Southeast Africa with all that energy it exports. So putting it online is paramount for that country and for their future. So I hope they make the right choice.
Thank you, Erik. Well, this is a very fascinating discussion. Obviously, 1 hour is not enough to talk about all the issues, but we already moved beyond the time of our panel. I just would like to ask all the participants to conclude their remarks in a few sentences, if there's anything else they would like to add. Let's start with Erik. You already have the mic.
Again, very pro development of Africa in fixing that severe energy deficit. When too many Africans wake up and have less than an hour use of a 100-watt light bulb equivalent per day, that's a real problem, and I find it incredibly wrong that the West lectures them to not develop their hydrocarbons. And so I encourage them to seek private capital elsewhere, not through the normal channels, and that the private sector can be leaned upon just like they depend on them for geoscience and drilling and production expertise. The private sector can provide that underlying insurance and security to make sure that the production and the earnings from that run long and well.
Yeah. Being the coal guy, I have to say, don't forget coal. Coal is the cheapest.
Hydrocarbons.
Well, yeah, it's a carbon. Yeah, you're right. No, it is a hydrocarbon. It's more carbon, but actually coal doesn't have the security issues, right? Because it's a low-value product. In our industry, there's no security issue, right? So in fact, that's very, very secure. But invest in whatever it is, oil, coal, gas, you need all of it. Invest in mining, invest in infrastructure, invest in the environment, make it efficient, right? get money for these things. And then again, if you're worried about whatever you're worried about, then do carbon capture and storage, be my guest. But what South Africa is doing with ESCOM, right? I mean, there's $8.5 billion coming into South Africa. Okay, decarbonize now. I mean, are you crazy to decarbonize South Africa? I mean, it's going to be completely a disaster. It's already a disaster in Germany in the next years, you'll see it. And now in South Africa. So you have to invest in existing infrastructure, and at the same time, you have to invest in research and development to find a solution for the energy problem. We do not have that solution. That solution, in my view, will be a combination of fusion and fission, maybe geothermal, and some sort of solar. Nothing to do with today's photovoltaic. Yeah? So anyways, investment in, not divestment from fossil fuels is a solution for Africa.
Yeah, I think my mic is working. On that theme of investment, I'll say it's this. Africans, you need to invest in your ability to tell your story and make sure that you are the leaders of the narrative about your continent. Okay, invest in that, all right? Don't have a continual, almost colonial narrative being told about this continent in the rest of the 21st century. Start to take command of your continent, your regions, your countries, and tell the world that we're here ready to partner, not to be exploited, because we have a lot to offer to the world. And I would submit that if you tell the narrative right, you'll find out that this continent can drive energy transition instead of being some bit player in the park.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Join me to... Yes, we'll ask them.
Esteemed speakers. One of the key takeaways from all this is owning our story, right? And as one of our themes for the whole conference is that Africa by Africans for Africans, right? So we want to continue this narrative, and we're hoping we'll have more insightful discussions as the day progresses. And please enjoy your day, and thank you so much for making time. It's not every day that you get so many speakers talking about Africa in Africa. Thank you so much. And just one or two announcements. So we'll just have a quick break, and then we'll continue with other sessions. Feel free to go to the other 3 venues and enjoy the discussions. Thank you so much.